For our speaker tonight, we have Lynch Castellano will present her program, and it's on World War II, the Chronicle of 90,000 Navy Women of World War II. Nancy Castellano, herself a World War II wave, a recruit training instructor at the only such school in the USA, Lehman College in Bronx, New York. She will recount a personal view of the formation, training, and dedicated teamwork that existed among the women who arrived there on troop trains from all over the USA, and the difficulty that was encountered with serving in a man's Navy. Posters, photos, and other memorabilia will accompany her program. A longtime JRHSLA teacher in Morris Township, Morris School District, Ms. Castellano, a graduate of Montclair State Teachers College, resides in Morristown, New Jersey. Known in the area for her interesting programs, her self-published book will be available for signing, benefiting the MC Retirees Education Association Scholarship Fund for high school seniors aspiring to teach. The program is free, and of course, we're welcoming you, Nancy, and we're glad you're here. Give her a little round.
There are some things for you to look at if you'd like to look at them later. I'll be pointing to some things, and I'm in front of, well, I guess I'm not in front of anything right now, but that might happen. These are all clippings and so on from the scrapbook my mother kept for me while I was in the ways. Well, everything isn't. Some things are from the scrapbook. These are copies of recruiting posters that were, the originals of them, I saw one original, were hand-painted. And I don't know how they reproduced them, but they were all over the country in theater lobbies. They were about as big as the whole poster. These are smaller copies. They were in theater lobbies. They were on billboards along the highways when, in the days that you had billboards. I remember one in particular. I don't have a copy of that one here, but I've seen it many times. That I saw when I was getting to be the age that I could be in the ways when they were starting, and it was on Route 1 right near Newark Airport. Newark Airport was a little tiny thing in those days, of course. And it was a girl, a wave, who had gotten a telegram, and underneath it, I used this on my Christmas letter last year, it said, "That was the day I joined the Waves." I really feel that was the one that inspired me to join, because it showed a Western Union telegram in the background, and the name on it was addressed to somebody named Nancy. So I figured, and she had dark hair and was my age and the whole thing, so I figured, well, this is it, I want to join the Waves. But the recruiting posters were very important. They were done by an artist who worked for the Saturday Evening Post, but they brought him into the Navy. His name was John Philip Falter, and he was an understudy to Norman Rockwell. And there are some posters, I don't have them here tonight, copies of them, but there are some that were almost a little bit cartoonish and definitely have a Norman Rockwell aspect to them. So I just think that's kind of interesting. He hand-painted them from photographs. And where's that small one? This one. This one, I had the original of this, and somebody, some other woman, some other wave I knew, was no longer living now, but she had the original that she bought she found at a garage sale. And I would have loved to have had it. She said, I paid $5 for it. I said, I'll give you 10, but she wouldn't sell it. But I took a picture of it anyway and had it blown up. And this is the picture. And I know that this is a picture of, you can tell by the way they're dressed. It's along the Lackawanna Railroad. It's one of the stations. My guess from the way the grown-ups are dressed is that it's Short Hills or maybe South Orange Mountain Station or one of those along the railroad. And I just think that's a wonderful picture, and I still would like to get hold of the original, and it was very heavy, the original recruiting poster, and I guess they all were heavy metal in the background. As I said, they were in the theater lobbies and everything else, so we young girls fancied ourselves in the elegant uniform, you know, and that's what happened. So that's what those are. Okay, I was stationed at Hunter College, Bronx campus. That's very important. Hunter is actually a college downtown and still exists. But they had something, actually they called it the Annex. It had 4 buildings, and it was the only campus in the New York, I don't know what it was called then, but now it would be that CUNY system, C-U-N-Y. It was the only campus, the only college that really had a campus that would be good for marching and all that kind of thing. And so the wave started there. But kind of getting ahead of myself. We did, however, we did march through all the streets at Hunter, and we called it Hunter, but it was actually a battleship, officially christened by Eleanor Roosevelt during World War II, when the waves came there, as the USS Hunter. And it included the entire area, 15 apartment houses, actually 18. The officers had a couple of apartment houses. Somewhere there's a map. Where's the map? Here, right in front of me. The map is down here. Hold it up a minute. This is the ship. That whole area that you see in white. There are some areas in blue that were used thank you. I just need it for a minute. That were used for special occasions. This is the Hunter campus itself, 4 buildings. I was there 2 weeks ago where they asked me to speak partly because I'm one of the very few, maybe the only one left, that was stationed there the whole time because I trained recruits. That was my job. I may tell you more about that later. And so they've added 15 buildings. So all that you see white is dense with buildings right now. And it's called Lehman College today. It became Lehman College in 1968. Hunter is downtown only. Okay, now these are the apartments all around here. They were lettered. I was in building E. Later on I was in building D. I was in building M, building L. We moved around, but they were all within like 195th Street, University Avenue. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that area. Bronx, yeah. 109 up to 197th Street. Actually, the address of the college is Bedford Park Boulevard. So you might be able to picture it. I couldn't believe it when I saw it because, see, it was all roped off, you know, when I was there. There was no traffic or anything else. It was New York. Only in New York to see all this traffic and buses parked and just absolutely dense when I was there a couple weeks ago. And one of the key spots of it, it was the Kingsbridge Armory. That's where we checked in. That's where I saw Roosevelt, that I'll try to tell you about later, on his last campaign tour. And that's where we marched and so on in inclement weather, which it was the day Roosevelt arrived. It poured rain. And he had an open car that he kept open. That's another story. As we marched around the streets at Hunter, and I'll refer to it as Hunter. In New York, I had to be careful because I was at Lehman College. And they're a little bit touchy about referring to their college as Hunter, even though they understood the circumstances. And I kept saying the USS Hunter. But as we marched around, yes, the USS Hunter in the city streets and so on, that as I said, were roped off. People would often stand at the barricades, and they were so respectful. They applauded us, they saluted, they hands over their heart, hats over their heart, because the men wore hats in those days. They leaned out of their apartment houses because we sang a lot. I had the singing platoon, something else I will talk about later too. and they sang as they marched through the streets. One of the songs, and so they leaned out of their windows, applauding, and always very respectfully, no yelling and cheering, but they applauded, and of course we liked that, and we felt very welcome. When you stop to think about it, that was nice of them, because many people were just literally dumped out of the apartment houses by the U.S. Navy, we didn't know this though, don't blame us, by the government under a Special War Act. They were given 3 weeks to get out of their apartments and find other apartments. The Navy did help them relocate, and they did pay their moving expenses, but that was it. And I did hear that for a while in the very beginning, I wasn't old enough to join yet, in the very beginning of the war, that they weren't, they told their children. I had a next door neighbor who lived up there, and he told me this when he was a little kid. He said that they were told to spit at the waves when they marched by. However, that never happened when I was there, and I'm not sure if my neighbor made it up or not, but whatever. So we marched through the streets, and we sang. I'm not going to sing for you, but I'll tell you the words. We sang Anchors Aweigh among them, of course, and there was a song that the Waves made up that was in counterpart with Anchors Aweigh, called Waves of the Navy, and the word, it was very nice, it made very nice harmony. And the words were, waves of the Navy, there's a ship sailing down the bay, and she won't slip into port again until that victory day. Carry on for that gallant ship, and for every hero brave, who will find ashore his man-sized chore, was done by a Navy wave. Oh. Now that sums up what the wave's purpose was. Our purpose was to replace men, and they were desperately needed in the Pacific, to replace men for sea duty, for combat. And that meant in Washington offices, there were thousands of waves, thousands of Navy jobs in Washington offices, particularly in communications and that kind of thing. You have to remember that there was no technology yet. It's hard to realize that. A lot of waves were yeomen, were typists of classified material. That's the important thing. Classified, very classified material that you would do today with a computer. There weren't even electric typewriters yet. So, and that puts it a little bit into perspective. It's almost hard, although I lived through that era. You all are very young, so you probably didn't. It's hard to realize what really happened. All right, let's just go back a little bit. The bombing of Pearl Harbor. The 70th anniversary of that will be this year. Did you realize that? December 7th, 1941. December 7th, 2011. 7 decades ago, Pearl Harbor was bombed. And that was the beginning of World War II. Yes, we were fighting in Europe and all that kind of, we were helping in Europe more or less as Allied forces and all. But World War II, we really got into it on December 7th. And I was a student at Montclair State Teachers College in my freshman year. I was 17, and I'll tell you about the women who started the Waves, but I just remember, hearing from one of the boys at the college had been listening to the radio on in his car that Sunday afternoon, and he came over to us. We were all, clowning around on the steps of the college, and, as kids would. And he said, the Japanese just bombed Pearl Harbor. I heard it on the radio. Of course, I said, where is Pearl Harbor? But I found out a lot of people didn't know where Pearl Harbor was, but we certainly know today where it was. Well, these women, when you see across the top here, were already working on, along with Eleanor Roosevelt, she's here, were working on starting the Waves. Big thing they wanted to do. We had yeomanettes in World War I. this is a yeomanette outfit right here. They did just typing, which is fine, because waifs did a lot of typing too. They had to be expert typists and all that. But the yeomanettes were an auxiliary. The WACs were already in place, but they were an auxiliary. What these women wanted was for women to come into the Navy and be in the full-time Navy, to be in the Naval Reserve, no auxiliary. And that's what the men, the admirals, and Roosevelt himself were very, very much against. That was, it was the days of a woman's place was in the home and that kind of thing, and this is how they felt. But these women would not settle for it, and they were wonderful, wonderful women. Highly educated, wealthy. I suppose that went along with the scene, and that. Now, starting with the one on the left, I have a pointer too. Well, it doesn't matter. Starting with the one on the left, her name is Virginia Gildersleeve. She was the dean of Barnard College. She had a saying, this gal is Virginia Gildersleeve, dean of Barnard College. She had a saying even before, very, very early in World War II, before the wave started. We didn't actually start until July of 1942, by the time they got the whole act together, that what this nation needs, I think this is almost a direct quote, what this nation needs is trained brains. To have enough, the nation must turn to its women. Very nicely put. She didn't say the men don't have brains. Now, another woman that worked with her, also from Barnard, is this lady right here, named Elizabeth Reynard, and she was a professor of English. She's shaking hands with Admiral Jacobs. He was an important admiral in the 3rd Naval District. I saw him a couple of times. I think he was one of the nicer ones. The admirals were, for the most part, very much against the women coming into the Navy. This one, her name, and this is the same one. Here she's a yeomanette in World War I, and here she's actually went into the waves and went into uniform. So did Elizabeth Reynard, not Gildersleeve. Gildersleeve was quite a bit older. Of course, to us it was very old. She probably, no, she was about my mother's age. My mother was around 60 at that time, so she was 60. In those days, 60 was very old. To me now, it sounds like a kid. Anyway, this woman's name is Joy Bright Hancock. Joy Bright Hancock was the daughter of an admiral, the leading admiral at Lakehurst Naval Air Station here in our state. She had a pilot's license, it was back in the Amelia Earhart era. She had a pilot's license, and she was very much interested in the women coming in for aviation. But we never really got to aviation. We did get to waves who repaired planes and worked on planes and did that kind of thing, because we had lots of girls came in from California where they had worked at Lockheed Aircraft and that kind of thing. To take a plane up, well, a wave, even though they had pilot's licenses, a wave could only take a plane up for testing purposes. I always thought that was kind of funny, like, so if she crashes, it's only a woman, to crash. The men, or they could deliver a plane someplace. Of course, we did not go overseas or anything like that. But they're the 4 women who really started the waves, and they worked hard. They appointed, when it finally got established, they appointed, of course they worked with Mrs. Roosevelt, they appointed Mildred McAfee, who was the president of Wellesley College. And she took a leave of absence, and she became the director of the waves. They worked very, very hard, but it took, and we needed men desperately. The draft was just not producing enough men, and we needed them in the Pacific once the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. It took 8 precious months before Roosevelt finally agreed to sign the act, and it was signed on July 30th, 1942. So it took 8 months from when Pearl Harbor was hit. So then they had to scamper around getting a lot of things done. But I think they must have been working on things in the meantime. For a short time, they recruited some waves, not a lot, but they got a few, and they sent them to Iowa for training. That's the only time that it wasn't Hunter in New York. And it didn't work out for a lot of reasons. It was not conducive to recruiting or to the marching and the outdoor stuff that had to be done, because one wave officer told me, who was out there, that they had temperatures of 37 degrees below zero in the winter. So certainly you couldn't be doing the marching out there or anything. And it wasn't an attraction for recruiting. I mean, it was kind of, who really wanted to go to Iowa? Except the Republicans, I think, really liked it. But, you know, for recruiting people, it sort of had to be New York. And New York did get them. They came by troop train, and this was Hunter, and all the advertising was done. You had to be 20 was the minimum age. I was now getting to be like 18. I kept writing to Mrs. Roosevelt, please lower the age limit, Mrs. Roosevelt. Never heard from her. I didn't like it. Anyway, but it gave me a chance to finish college, to finish the points that I needed to do my student teaching. It's funny how life works out. Because I did my student teaching, what they had me do in the waves was teach recruits. And that meant drill, it meant a lot of things. I even taught naval history and, you know, little lectures and things like that. But it was because of my teaching background, so that was a good thing. So that's the way that came about. Now, once they got started, even though it was out in Iowa, they needed a lot of wave officers to put many, many things together that the waves were going to do. And, you know, officers are officers, they're people in charge. So they called upon, since they were Barnard women, that was among the Seven Sisters colleges, maybe some people in here who went to Seven Sisters colleges. What they did was they asked the presidents of each of those colleges to pick out 7 of their best and brightest of their alumni or their students. I knew a couple of those officers, and have them join the waves. And also altogether, counting Mildred McAfee, they had 50. Now Elizabeth Reynard, who came from Barnard herself, became the one in charge of training the officers. You know, she was just like in charge. I mean, none of them knew anything about the Navy, but they were capable women, and they did this. I just think it's kind of interesting. And so finally, the waves really got started. Now, the boot camp training lasted 6 weeks, but in the very beginning, they needed them so desperately. They needed them to replace the men in the Pacific, particularly in Washington, D.C. There were thousands of waves in Washington, D.C. in those government offices, communications particularly. So desperately that one woman told me that it happened to her. That with the first couple of classes of waves, they put them through in about 2 or 3 weeks, got them into their uniforms in a real hurry. Usually it took 2 weeks to go into uniform, and then you had another 4 weeks in wave training. But, you know, just rushed them through so that they could release the men that were so badly needed in the Pacific. And I think that's very interesting. And we always claimed that we're not saying we won the war, but we sure as heck helped. I mean, we replaced the guys that had to go. And some people think the waves joined, you know, to meet guys, and there were none. There weren't any. Gone. In Washington, many of them were in communications, and one woman I know lives up in California, and she's still living, older than I am. She was in communications, she was a Morristown High School graduate. I didn't know her at the time. I've just gotten to know her the last couple of years. And she had to be, what would you call it, really checked out by the FBI and all that. They came around to her home in Morristown, went around to all the neighbors, went to Morristown High School, looked at all her records. This is how particular they were, that the women would be, see, the men who were trying to keep us out felt that we couldn't keep our mouths shut. And this was highly confidential material. I don't know, today it would be computers, you see, but then you have WikiLeaks. I think the ways are better than computers. We're better than computers, I really do. But anyway, my friend, her name is Janet, told me that every 6 weeks they were called into a chapel and made to swear that they would not divulge anything that went on or anything that they saw. She decoded Japanese messages. And of course, if you knew her, she is a kind of, really would keep her mouth shut. I don't think they ever would have asked me to do this, but they did ask her. And she said her parents even only knew that she was in Washington and she was in communications in Washington. And so that's the way that went. And there were many other things that they did. They did a lot of teaching. That's why they liked teachers very much. The kind I did was one thing. But see, I didn't replace a man to go overseas. But many of them did. But they taught men who were, they also taught men who were going to go overseas. And they taught them things, if they had the aptitude for it and the experience with it, which they found out through tests and questions and everything else, and some of them did. They taught them gunnery. They taught with a simulated something. They taught pilots how to do blind flying, I think was called. That's something I wanted to do. Now, I would not have had any aptitude for that at all. But, you know, young girl, that sounded exciting. Or a control tower operator and things like that, because we had naval air stations. But as I said, they did a lot of teaching of the men that had to learn how to do some of these things and then went over. But they never let them actually fly the planes, except, as I said, for testing purposes. And we had quite a few of them were pilots, because that was kind of starting to be a popular thing with Amelia Earhart and so on. Okay, so a few interesting experiences. Well, I should tell you about the singing platoon. I'm very proud of that. I talked to my company commander and said, I was just, you know, with the regular girls who were fine. And we marched them all around. They marched 22 miles a day. I marched with them after all. I was very young. And I wanted to do whatever they did. And I got along okay with them. And they marched to classes, marched to the various buildings at Hunter, marched to the mess hall 3 times a day. 6,000. There were 6,000 girls on the station at all times. So 3 times a day, the cafeteria at Hunter produced, and it was run by civilian personnel. It was catered. We didn't waste wave power having them do the dishes or cook the meals. They marched. They went three times a day. Meals were served in shifts to 6,000 women, and it ran very, very smoothly. So there wasn't enough room on the campus for 6,000 girls to just hang out if they didn't have some appointment, like a class or something, to take them to. They would march back to the barracks. The barracks were the apartment houses that were up on the various streets, blocks away. And they'd go to the apartments, and then maybe an hour later there'd be some appointment, march back again. We were marching all over. In each regiment, a regiment came in every 2 weeks, and that was 2,000 people and girls. And a regiment went out every 2 weeks to go all over the country in their various jobs. They went on troop trains. They came in on troop trains. all kinds of weather. As far as that's concerned, the troop trains were not heated and not air conditioned. We didn't even hear that in trains yet. And it was wartime, so trains were not heated anyway. And as I said, they went all over the country doing various jobs. So, let me see what I want to tell you about next. So, I do have notes. To remind me, so I don't want to get off the track too much. All right, there were many, when the women were trying to convince those women, the three women, were trying to convince the men to let women into the Navy, they finally had to make a few concessions. One concession was, compromise is a better word. One was that the girls would have to, they said they have to do everything that the men do. So, they had to have shots. And that was a ridiculous and very cruel thing, because we were not going overseas. They knew that. We had to have malaria shots, every possible kind of shot. And that's the only time I remember in my own boot camp, so I always felt sorry for my girls when I had to take care of them, feeling sick, because we had typhoid shots, everything. And when it was shots day, we would get into formation and march back to the barracks after getting the shots. It was hot in the summertime, and the girls, some of them fell out of line. We had a Navy ambulance followed us with pharmacist mates to pick up the fallen recruits, revive them, and they got back to the barracks. But I think we held up better than the men would have held up. However, it was such a ridiculous and cruel thing. It was the only time I think that I remember at night that I cried and missed my mother. But the next morning, everybody got up and went on with the job, and no, I don't remember anybody ever complaining. I'm sure they did, but I don't recall it. My girls didn't anyway. And we went on with our marching, but it was pretty tough. Sometimes it was real hot in the middle of August or something like that, and it was rough. So there were some compromises. Another compromise was we had to swab the decks. Now that was a joke. I mean, the way we treated it was a joke. But Mildred McAfee must have said, okay, so they'll swab the decks. So that was done on a Friday night in boot camp. As far as I know, the waves, once they got out and they got into their other establishments, which were barracks again, and so on, they didn't have to do anything like that. But they gave us the mops and the brushes and all that stuff. There's a picture of one of them up here. And of course that was strictly a photo op, I imagine. But anyhow, the decks were the rooms in the apartments. By the way, we had 16 girls in a 3-room apartment. All right, we had double-decker bunks, which had to be made perfectly, and that was all part of my job. Show them how to do it. Believe me, I didn't know it before I went into the ways myself. Anyway, we had bare floors. All the rooms were used, including if there was a dining room. Usually there were 16 girls in the apartment. It was really 3-room. And the kitchens were only used for laundry. They had clotheslines hanging up. We had our own laundry station too, but it was kind of hard to get over there and leave your stuff and get back for it. The girls could go on their own to do those things, but there wasn't a lot of time. So most times I guess we washed things out. I don't remember much about that. And hung them up. I don't know that we got our things mixed up with each other. I don't remember anything like that happening. There was one bathroom for 16 girls. I never remember hearing anybody complain, including me. Yeah? And we were very clean, just, I just don't remember that was a problem. But that was another compromise that we had to do all these things. But let me get back to swabbing the deck. So they gave us all the stuff. We literally dumped water all over those floors, wooden floors. They must have had to replace the floors after we left. Because, I mean, you know, and we made a joke of it. Okay, well, we sang and then it would be captain's inspection the next morning. Every Saturday morning, the white-gloved wave officers would run their white-gloved fingers over everything in the apartment to look for dust. And one group, one apartment would always, or one company, that would be all the apartments, it's a whole building, would be selected for what they called the Navy E. I never found out what the E meant. There was a flag we hung out that said E, a blue and white flag, probably efficiency or excellence or something like that. And my group won it, my company won it once, and we were very proud, you know. It was almost a little bit like being in camp, you know. They had a song contest, and two of my girls wrote a song. I have it up here if you want to look later. I had the music and everything she wrote it on. But I was talking about the singing platoon. The singing platoon, there was one in each regiment. Remember, a regiment came in every 2 weeks. I'm using this like a real teacher. Regiment came in every 2 weeks, and it was conducted by, they picked them out very carefully. When we came in at the Kingsbridge Armory, checked in, they already knew from the recruiting station what girls were interested, were in choirs and certain glee clubs, and had good voices and everything. At Kingsbridge Armory, they actually tried them out, those who looked like they would qualify. And they selected a whole platoon that were the singers. And they sang in harmony. And when they sang through the streets, it was really beautiful. So I said, I love singing. I said to my company commander, I said, I would love to have the singing platoon, meaning just get them around, and do all the things with them. But they had their own choir master. And they sang on radio shows, and I'll tell you more about that. So she asked for it, and our company got a singing platoon, and I got to be the one in charge of it. And then each one that came in, each time they came in, they gave me the singing platoon. And I absolutely adored that. And they sang, the Australian marching song, Waltzing Matilda. That's a terrific marching song and terrific harmony. They sang the Bells of St. Mary's. They sang, naturally they sang that Waves of the Navy and Anchors Away. And they were just wonderful. Sang all the time through the streets of the Bronx. So, and I have a website, and I had a woman wrote to me not too long ago, and she wanted to buy one of my books, and her mother had been in the waves, she said. Her mother had been in the waves, and this was just Easter. Her mother. And she said how she found out about me and my book and that was that she Googled wave singing platoon. I tried it. I couldn't even find it myself, but she did. And I've had some wonderful communications that way. And so then she wrote back to me. I mailed her the book, and she wrote back to me that her mother just loved the book. She was giving the book to her mother for Mother's Day, this past Mother's Day. And I thought that was nice. But anyway, so that was the singing platoon. As long as I'm on that subject, see, the nice thing about the speech is I can skip all over the place because I'm just giving you a general view of the waves and the training at Hunter. Let me say this. I know from ex-waves, or waves that I've talked to, there aren't a lot still living. But I know that their jobs, although they were highly secret, classified job that the one woman did in Washington with communications and all that, when I went, I did write them up in my book, but when I interviewed them, each one of them said to me, but there's nothing to tell. Because they were just working with that, they weren't really working with people. I got to work with people, so that's why I have a lot to tell. So the Wave Singing Platoon did a radio program once a week on WOR, New York. I mean, while at boot camp, they did a radio program. I'd lose somebody, and then I had a company commander. Well, they were always kind of threatening you with it. They were just trying to scare everybody, I think, with court-martials and everything. If you lose anybody, you'll be court-martialed. Don't lose anyone. When you're in Manhattan, be sure you keep them together. They have to march in formation in Manhattan. I said, okay. Now remember, these girls had never seen Manhattan either, so they were, of course, thrilled. I wasn't afraid that anybody would run away or something, but they could get lost, and they wouldn't have even had any money. Well, I think we rode the subways free as military. So, but it all worked, that part worked out fine. We went down into Manhattan and got off the subway. Now we had to go a couple of blocks up to NBC Studios in Rockefeller Center, same place it is now. And one of the girls, I said, I don't know what we're going to do because there was so much noise in New York. I wasn't used to this. I was used to the quiet then streets of the Bronx that were roped off for us. What are we going to do here? So one of the girls said, we'll sing. Oh, that's a good idea. And so they did. Marched up. I mean, in the meantime, we're getting all these wisecracks from servicemen that were hanging around. Oh, look at them, you know, and all this stuff. So this is a nightmare. They got into formation. They were very, very good anyway at that stuff. And we marched up. They're singing. We marched all these blocks up. And I don't know what street we were at, 42nd Street or something. Had to march to 50th, I think. And the people almost swept the sidewalk, swept off the sidewalk, hands over their hearts again, saluting. I mean, it was just magnificent. And we marched up to the NBC studios. And they sang with Perry Como, which was nice. Somebody said, did you get to meet him? Yeah, I did, but I mean, we didn't talk or anything. He was there. He was with his wife and his little boy, who's now about 68 years old. I saw him on TV not too long ago. But whatever. And we rehearsed, and I sat in what they called the client's box, which is very nice. We had a pharmacist mate with us, a woman. Pharmacist, oh, there weren't any men. Pharmacist mate, just in case anybody got sick. Nobody did. And then we had to do 2 shows. One for the East. We sang with the Chesterfield Supper Club. We had to do 2 shows. One for the East Coast. That's the way it was in those days. Hard to believe that. And one for the West Coast 3 hours later. In the 3 hours, we marched again up to the Essex House where we were given a banquet, and Perry Como, everybody there, and of course the girls were thrilled. I mean, they're from farmlands and everything else. They had never been in New York. And we're at the Essex House and all. It's a marvelous experience, and I loved it too. And then we went back and finished the show, and got back on the subway. When you got off the subway, there were Shore Patrol there. Shore Patrol were at like the checkpoints of the entire station, but we didn't have fences or anything. We only had wooden barricades, but there would be Shore Patrol there, and you had to check in. It was very safe. My mother used to worry when I did get, a weekend off now and then, and I could go home because I only lived in New Jersey. My mother used to worry about my getting back there at night in New York and everything. You don't need to worry because the Shore Patrol are right there to take care of us, and they did. I mean, we were very, very well protected. I was even over there on New Year's Eve once, and that was something else, but maybe I can tell you about that one later. So that was one experience in New York. Now there was another one where we did a lot of bond drives, and the singing platoon again were the ones chosen to do the bond drives. And they sang that, any bonds today, like the Andrews sisters who did bond drives also. And we were asked to, they were asked to sing. I stayed down here. They were asked to sing at Times Square on the platform. I guess it's still there. Where the wall comes down on New Year's Eve. There was a platform there, at least in those days. We had to cross from the sidewalk go across at Times Square to the platform. And there was a policeman there, and there was horrendous traffic in New York. And New York has always been New York. There was a lot of traffic, a lot of taxi cabs and all that. There was a policeman there, and when he saw us, he stopped all the traffic in Times Square so that my girls could march over. And they went up on the stage and did their thing. We sold thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth. Not just my group, but the Waves themselves. A lot of people don't know that. So a lot of war bonds. Well, they call them war bonds. They were savings bonds, they called them war bonds. We marched 3,500 strong. There's a picture up there on one of these boards. You might see it. We marched up Fifth Avenue. I was only in a few months at that point. I was in the parade. I may have even been in boot camp. But we marched up Fifth Avenue we marched from 28th Street. There were 3,500 of us at that point. 28th Street to 68th. And it was cold and blustery. It was October. And it was just wonderful. And it was to sell bonds. So the picture that's up there somewhere, my father cut out of the New York Herald Tribune. It said, nice title, A Tide of Waves Marches Up Fifth Avenue. I thought that was pretty good. I'm trying to think what else the singing platoon did. But it was a really wonderful experience, and they were the best. I mean, if you look at any of those pictures, including the one that's on the cover of my book, and I have the books up there if you want to look at them, there's not a wave out of step. There's not a wave out of, everybody's on the same foot. They especially the singing platoon, heard the downbeat right. If any girl had a problem at first, I don't really remember any, but we had a little joke about it. We called those people motor morons. But they weren't really all that bad. Not to their faces. But, in our staff room we talk. I was in, as a trainer of the girls, I was in what they called ship's company. I was part of ship's company, and we had a staff room, and we roomed together. There were about usually 6 of us in a company, and 6 of us in the apartment. But the recruits actually had 16 in the apartment. And as I said, I never heard anybody really complaining. While I was there, Here Come the Waves was filmed with Betty Hutton and Bing Crosby. They were not there. Johnny Mercer was, who wrote the music. He wrote Accentuate the Positive is from Here Come the Waves. It's kind of, I've got to tell you, it's kind of a Class B movie. I have not seen it yet on the classic movie station. But my feet are in it, my legs are in it somewhere. I was in boot camp at that time, and they just did background shots. And I figured that the guys that came from Hollywood, hats on the back of their heads and all, I think they enjoyed their job, because they were on these rolling carts, and they were lying down, filming the girls' legs, right? What a job. But I was there when that took place. And Johnny Mercer came into the cafeteria. Well, I happened to be in there with my group. We were all sitting there. By the way, in the cafeteria, I've got to tell you this while I think of it, we were there's a picture of that up there too. We were very, very crowded. There would be 1,000 or more at a time. We had 14 minutes or something like that. We had to clear out. We had good food though, but you had to eat very quickly from metal trays and all that. We had to eat in our uniforms, in our coats and hats. There was no place to put them. But anyway, Johnny Mercer came in, and he brought an orchestra in, and he played a lot of music, his music, because he was quite a composer, and he told jokes and kidded around, and we were entertained by Johnny Mercer. Now, with this being in the cafeteria and having to eat at such close quarters, I ate with my group. Wherever I could sit, I sat down. We had tables very close. We were packed in, absolutely. And I didn't realize it, but one night, I guess it was in the wintertime because I had the coat on. There was some kind of a cream soup, and I must have spilled it on my coat. We had one officer, I don't like her to this day, and she headed the parade that we did up Fifth Avenue, too. She was the brigade commander. But she came around occasionally, kind of threw her weight around. She decided to have an inspection the next morning after I spilled the cream soup on the coat. And, you know, we got up at what was called 0600, 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's when we started out to march to the mess hall, which was a few blocks away. It was in one of the Hunter buildings, but it was a few blocks away. And when we got back to the barracks, she pulled an inspection. They checked for hosiery seams and all, and I was meticulous about how I looked and about how my troops looked. And of course, the sun had come out by then, and it shines right on the coat. I'm not aware of this. And my name was Lynch, and they called you by your last name. She goes, Lynch, what's that on your coat? You know, in front of my troops. That's what bothered me most, that she embarrassed me in front of the girls who I think thought quite a bit of me. And, you know, she carried on. And so she ordered me to get the coat cleaned and report to her, maybe the next day or whatever. I hated her guts, but and I went over, because I could get out off the station. I went over to Fordham Road, took the coat, wore the coat, and a cleaner over there cleaned it for me in a half hour, you know, and then I reported back to her. But that was an embarrassing experience, pointing out what it was to sit, you know, that closely in the cafeteria and everything. But again, we didn't mind. And there are some stories I've read that girls learned to, and you know, they didn't have enough forks and things like that. I don't know how it said they ate. I was reading something on that recently. I don't really remember anything like that. I thought it was a very well-run cafeteria. And I asked when I was over there a couple of weeks ago, that was in the same building where I spoke a couple of weeks ago. I said, can I see the cafeteria? And they said, sure. They don't use it anymore. I don't know what they use it for, but they don't use it as a cafeteria. And I went down and I said, this doesn't look right to me, because it was much bigger. I would say we must have had a couple, maybe 1,000 girls in there at a time, you know, from different groups. And so there was a man there who knew the whole story of everything. And he, you know, a Hunter, and he said they had reduced some of it. Usually they add on to things. It was a very big cafeteria, and I said, it just doesn't look big enough. But I remembered something about the door. And he said, no, this was the cafeteria, but we've made it smaller. I'll close with, you all remember Bob Hope. Bob Hope, for many years, did something with Thanks for the Memory. It just gets cut off, it gets cut off. Way back. Well, I wrote some words to that. I'm certainly not going to sing it. But I'd like to close with it. Right? Thanks for the memory of wearing navy blue through the years of World War II. It felt so right to join the fight and help our country through. Yes, I thank you so much. Thanks for the memory of marching to the beat of steady cadenced feet on rainy days and snowy days and New York's August heat. But I thank you so much. Many's the time we had laughter, and sometimes we shared sorrow after. But gee, it was great to be part of it. We dried our eyes as we helped the guys. So thanks, yes, thanks for the memory. The years have quickly passed, but the memories will last. The war was won, our job was done, there was no more to ask. And I thank you. Yes, I thank you so much. As we say in the Navy, smooth sailing.